Welcome to The Hanley Effect, a podcast by the Hanley Foundation designed to educate, change minds, and save lives. Our goal is to inspire you, showcase our innovations, and change the conversation about addiction and mental health. Join us as we unravel stories of resilience, recovery, and hope.
Welcome to another edition of our wonderful podcast, where today we have the distinct pleasure of really delving deeper into the conversation of addiction. But as always, I'm joined by my two favorite doctors, Dr. Rachel Dosical and Dr. John Dybin, the Chief of Research and Innovation at Hanley Foundation, and Dr. Dosical, the CEO of Hanley Foundation. How are you, my friends?
We are great. For our listeners, I'd like them to know that Corey is wearing bright blue glasses today. When he does his announcer voice, he purses his lips. So we are today chuckling in the background as we watch him introduce us.
We're just having fun. It's a great time.
I've been accused of that Elvis lip thing. I don't really know much about that. I'll leave that to you and your imagination. Well, guys, growing up, I used to watch a great deal of Sesame Street. And when I was little, it was A is for apple, but we've certainly come a long way because T has become for trauma. And one of the men who was spearheading that and who initiated that is Dr. Jerry Moe, author, therapist, and of course a trainer, spoken all around the world, the White House and Capitol Hill, and of course has dedicated his life to working with young children impacted by addiction. Jerry, we're lucky to have you.
Oh, it's a blessing to be here.
You know, we had the opportunity of catching up and talking about your childhood growing up in San Francisco, and you've got a pretty fascinating story. So why don't you tell us how your childhood really led to your life's work?
Well, I grew up in a family where there was alcoholism and been there for generations, but incredibly blessed in that my family found recovery. So before I finished my teenage years, I had my dad in recovery and my mom in recovery. But what was fascinating, I was the identified patient in the sense that I was struggling, I was angry, I was upset, I was making poor choices. And one of the consequences that came my way at the age of 14 was to attend Alateen, 12-step program for the teenagers growing up in families where there was alcoholism. And I had to go there every week for a year. That was the consequence of the decisions that I'd made. And after about a month, what happened was my mom, who would drive me, I was only 14, decided that maybe she would go into the Al-Anon meeting that was going on at the time. And not that she needed it at all.
Right.
Her mother died of alcoholism when she was a teenager. And then her father died of it as well. And then married to dad, who was suffering from alcoholism. And so we had about 17 months where we were going regularly. Alateen changed my life and really helped me to see that what was going on wasn't my fault and how I needed to take better care of me and had this safe place to share anger and guilt and shame and all of that. And then what happened was, because we had changed, that 18 months later, the next miracle happens, and then my dad asks for help. And he'd been in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous, but just couldn't take hold. And that was it. And as we talked about before we started, my dad was sober for 38 years when he passed away. And my mom had been in Al-Anon 40 years.
Wow.
And I think about my kids, their grandkids, always saw the best version of them, which was so moving. And so here I am starting a career, and I wanted to work with children. And so, I went and got my degree, got a credential, and I was teaching. And so here I am at the age of 22 one morning. It's this simple: shaving, getting ready to go to work. And all of a sudden, something hit me that I never thought about before. And it's like, oh man, what a gift I was given at 14. I wasn't mature enough to understand it or to appreciate it. Because I have an older brother and sister that never got the gift. They escaped. There's a big gap in our ages. They each escaped our family by getting married at 18 or 19. And so I'm looking in the mirror and I start crying. I said, oh my God, what a gift. But then thought of, why didn't my brother get the gift? Luckily, he has it today. Why didn't my sister get the gift? And today she has it. Why me? The final thing that came up, I'll wrap this up, is that, and then it hit me, and that while I was grateful to begin my own recovery, my own healing at 14, I couldn't help but wonder what could have happened if somebody had started helping me when I was 7 or I was 8.
Wow.
And, Mark Twain has a famous quote. He says, the 2 most important days in a person's life are the day that they're born and the day they figure out why. And that morning, that changed, and it said, you know what? I will continue to work with kids, but I need to change my focus.
What? I didn't know that story.
Well, yeah, they don't tell it very often and don't get asked about it, but, that's the passion. Always, all these years, is that little kids are suffering. They shouldn't have to wait.
How did that lead you to your work with Sesame Street? And if you could, give us some insight into that and share that behind-the-scenes story that you told John and I as well.
So, I was late, everyone, which is why I haven't heard the story. This will be my first time.
We'll hook you up. So I had absolutely no idea that Sesame Street was working on this. And you hit it. Sesame Street about 10 years ago. And just champions of children, the top people that I have such incredible respect for, my gosh, they had seen that so many children are dealing with trauma these days, so many different kind of traumas. And so Sesame Street every year takes on 3 issues that the providers, Sesame Street in communities, the providers say, these are the issues happening, and we have very few resources to explain it from a kid's perspective. And so I had no idea about any of that. And so I was told there's an organization that I've been involved in since its beginning. It's a not-for-profit. It's called NACoA, the National Association for Children Impacted by Addiction. It's a not-for-profit it's an advocacy, public policy, awareness about the issues that kids and families face. And Sesame Street had called Sis Wenger, who at the time was the president and CEO. And Sis sent me a text saying, the people at Sesame Street want to talk to me. And I'm thinking, oh, who's scamming me now? Yeah, pick on the children's counselor, right? Don't tease me that way. And so the people from Sesame Street called. We had no idea. Sesame Street is great about keeping things a secret. And
so was it a person who called, or was it Grover?
No, Grover and I didn't get close till well after a few more visits.
Okay.
But I heard from a Cami Einhorn, who is this remarkable lady who's written over 30 kids' books, and she works at Sesame Street. So she called, and they said to me, we have found an activity that we think is simple, fun, and engaging, and we want to use it in this initiative. It's called the 7 C's, the letter C.
Right.
And they said, walk us through this. So I went through it. And when you work with kids and kids trust you and they feel safe around you, they'll be really brutally honest with their feedback.
That last activity is just awful. What were you thinking?
Kids let you have it. And so activities evolve over time. Because kids will say, well, why don't you do this instead? Or no, it should be this way. Which is, and everything is breathing and growing. And so
when you listen to them.
Right.
And you make it safe. Exactly. And the playful. So I walked through and they said, well, we want to use this in our initiative. And I immediately went to this place of immense joy and gratitude. Talking about, are you kidding me? This is Sesame Street.
Right.
And this could help kids.
So I've been a clinician for a long time working in addiction. I'm very familiar with the 7 C's. I've talked to family members and such about that. But for anybody who's listening who might not be familiar with that.
Sure, yeah. So the first 3 C's are, I didn't cause it. I can't control it. I can't cure it. And to bring the discussion full back, I learned those at 14 years old in Alateen. That's the basis of those. So I become a children's counselor, and what I realize is you can't just tell kids what not to do if you don't always tell them what to do. And so those last 4 C's are really a roadmap in healing. So but I can help care for myself. And think about family members. I had the blessing to sit in on the Hanley family program yesterday. Had my socks knocked off of me. Just so powerful. And one of the things that people were learning, but I got to switch the focus. I got to take care of me, but I can help take care of myself by sharing my feelings and making healthy choices and celebrating me, no matter what's going on in my life. So those were the 7, and that became one of the focal points to the initiative.
So the program that you attended yesterday was for individuals 18 years and up. Talk about the work that you're doing with us to develop programs for youth.
The exciting thing was to watch the process unfold, the brilliance of the counselors, the creating of a safe space for people to work, honoring them and giving people a chance to express their feelings, but also how much they love. To me, the biggest tragedy of this disease is that when a family's in it, nobody can consistently love the people that mean the most to them because the disease gets in the way. And so, Rachel, the idea is, how can we take this and make a children's program where kids are younger? And I'd always worked with 7 to 12-year-olds, very deliberately, in that there were programs for adolescents already in place. And I get to kids before they take that first drink or that first drug, because for some of us, it's the first one. You're off to the races, And so how do we do that? But how do we do it in a way that honors childhood and lets them play and have a good time and build relationships? So it's looking at the beauty and brilliance of yesterday in the Hanley family program, and how do we create it for children so that the entire family can get help.
That's so important, because they're so often the first to be affected and the last to receive help.
Well, yeah, and really the way through years that I look at it, we call it a children's program, and it is, but it's really a child-centered family program because the grown-ups participate too. And I think about yesterday, and it could be any of the family programs, but there's a mom yesterday who's getting help, and what she came up against was, that realization of, this is how the disease I never asked for has hurt my kids. And talk about painful, incredibly painful. And
a realization you don't want to
never
face.
Never. But what's interesting, Rachel, is for some of the folks, then they realize that, but then they think about, but this is what I grew up with too. And horror upon horror, I'm repeating that. And so to be in a children's program and have kids be able to say, Mom, I love you. I'm proud of you for what you're doing. I hate your disease, but I love you. I want you to get better. And so I think for the grown-ups in a program like this, they get to let go of some of that guilt and shame. That is just such powerful rocket fuel for going back to use or across addiction, if you will. And so it's really being able to change the legacy in the family. And if you think about it, in my family, I was the first one to get help. So it was the family members that actually got help and changed the family system, which made it a necessity for my dad to get help. And so often in these programs, kids will come whose parents are still, or older sibling is still in their disease.
The piece that you said that's so poignant for me is it's a mind shift for a young person to be able to say, I love my parent, but I hate the disease.
Yeah. And I tell you, that is, in a children's program, it's one of the most important things of all. In that if I were to, Rachel, if I were to look at you and you were 9 years old and I'm asking you to tell me about your dad's addiction. When I do it that way, I'm asking you to betray and be disloyal to your dad and to the family. But when we reframe it and say, let's talk about what this disease has done. Because if you need to have an enemy, the enemy is the disease.
Right.
That's right.
Not the person who's trapped by it. And kids will do that. We tell kids, hey, you know what? Addiction loves it when nobody talks. Addiction loves it when people keep secrets. And so let's tell on the disease, which makes it easier, I think, for the parent or the older sibling to see that the love that they have for me, and it's the disease is affecting everybody. So it's a really important shift.
I do work with a lot of adults, and I do some marriage therapy, and I come from a narrative approach, which has this idea of externalization, right? So the problem is never the person, the problem is the problem, and we help people separate that. And I find that process takes time and work with adults. It's a pretty sophisticated thing, separating the person from what you're experiencing from that. How did you come to do this with kids?
Addiction is such an abstract concept that so many adults can't wrap their arms around. And so we do this game that we created where one of us actually becomes the disease. And so you can see it, you can watch it, you can hear what it says. And what does addiction do? It grabs a hold of the people you love. It traps them. We use the word trapped, stuck, and hooked. That's what addiction does. But then we also introduce the superheroes, T&R, treatment and recovery. Superheroes.
With big capes. I hope they're
exactly.
Flapping. Yep,
exactly.
flapping.
With stars on them. Yeah. And so when treatment and recovery walk in the room, kids go bonkers. TNR. And if I'm playing the disease, they're all pointing at me. Jam him, slam him, wham him, bam him. Get addiction. And we teach kids the only thing that addiction is afraid of is TNR. Because when you have TNR, and then we have TNR surround the person, when you're in TNR, addiction can't mess with you. Now, addiction's going to be over in the corner watching and waiting.
Yes.
And then sometimes we'll play that police song. Every move you make, every breath you take, every claim you say, I'll be watching you. Oh, can't you see? You belong to me. And so they see it. They see it. And it also explains, because you have to teach kids, when mom or dad gets better, they need to go to meetings. They need to do continuing care. They need to see a therapist. So that's part of TNR. And if you don't explain it to kids, number of kids that are so upset, where's my mom going every night? She's not taking care of us.
Didn't you go to treatment and aren't you better now? Right. Why do you still need? Yeah.
And dad's got all these new friends. None of them have last names. Right. Come on.
Jerry, what impresses me most is, you spent 25 years at the Betty Ford Center. You're an expert in this space. But as we're talking, I'm looking at your eyes and I'm noticing the emotion. Always. And I'm noticing the passion.
Yeah.
How do you maintain that over such a long career? And what do you want parents to know who may be listening, who may be struggling, and they have young children?
Profound questions. I think for me, it's just really simple. It's thinking back to when I was that little boy and what could have happened to get help at a younger age and to have not gone through it. I can't change it, and I certainly continue to work to heal it. But I want other kids to not have to go through that. So that's always been the fire. And I think the other part is being able to unplug and being able to have time away from doing it, with such heart and joy, and doing it with emotion too. I mean, again, I go back to the family program here in Hanley that I was in yesterday, and they did the knee exercise. Everybody's in tears. And the powerful thing for the little kids is when we do a version, we'll work on it to make it fit Hanley, that I could be a grandfather here at Hanley, and my grandkids are going to come. And yet every little kid in that group is going to get me back in touch with the little kid. I think sometimes what we don't realize is addiction's intergenerational. It just keeps getting passed, and the trauma gets passed along and all the other things. And so, I can sit here and watch another little boy maybe with his dad, and it brings me back to being that little boy. So it's that healing that takes place. And as a grown-up, the healing always from my current family, but my family of origin too. Healing both of those is so critically important in all of that. And please tell me the second part of the question, because it was profound. I just can't bring it up.
The second part of the question, Jerry, was really that passion. And really, what do you want parents to know? I saw a stat from Sesame Workshop. I believe it was 1 in 8 families have a child that struggles with a loved one that has substance use disorders. And I was curious, what do you want them to know?
Yeah, and that statistic is flawed. And it's flawed in this way, and it always drives me nuts. So I'm glad you said that. In that it said that 1 out of 8 kids lives with someone. And there's more kids who don't live with the person with the substance use disorder because they're in prison, or because they're institutionalized, or because they're just missing in action, or because they've died.
That's a great point.
And so it's much larger. I mean, what I see, and we can play with statistics till we're crazy, it's somewhere between 1 out of 4 and 1 out of 3 kids. And let's face it, the opioid, heroin, fentanyl
devastating
epidemic has swelled those numbers. What I'd want parents to know is that, first of all, work on your own healing. Because I can be a better parent the more that I heal, the more that I grow, the more that I come to a better understanding, because I can't give my kids or grandkids things I don't have. So their own healing. But to get help for little kids now, to bring them to programs that offer a children's program for the beginning stages of learning about this, giving parents and grandparents an age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate vocabulary to use with kids to explain and have it become a family affair. In that we've gone through this disease together. Hey, how about we all go through recovery together too? Let's all do our part to heal.
It's been common over the years. I experienced people adults who come into treatment and they have kids. There's secrets around it. And so they have these questions. We've told the kids that, that mommy went to a spa for a month, or that daddy is on a long, long work trip, and there's this fear of talking to kids about treatment, about addiction. What would you say to a parent who says, should we hide this from our kids?
I think we often underestimate how much kids know. And what happens, and you see this, I got a big smile on my face, everybody who's listening, I know you can't see me, I wish you could, is to have people come in, even bring them into the children's program, he doesn't know anything.
Right.
and have kids share a time that the drug dealer chased their mom down the street and saw the whole thing. And so kids know a whole lot more. It's an individualized kind of thing. We need to tell kids something about what's going on. And I get more calls from interventionists and people. And it's almost, as a therapist, I'm on this edge all the time. How can you give them enough information to allow kids to go,
yeah,
like, okay, I get it, without overwhelming and confusing them? And so a simple one is being able to tell your kids that mom or dad is going to school right now. They're going to a special school. Don't say hospital, because kids automatically think they've got cancer.
Sure.
But they're going to school. And depending on how much kids know, what are they doing at school? Where they're learning to talk more about their feelings, and they're learning new ways to take care of themselves. And when mom or dad comes home, they're going to practice those kind of things with you. And if they know about alcohol or drugs, well, they're learning how not to drink alcohol anymore. Or they're learning how not to use drugs. The thing that Sesame Street did, the first video that we did, is called Lending a Hand. And it's Carly with Elmo and Chris, who works in Mr. Hooper's store. And this is the first time in her life that Carly has ever talked about mommy. It's my experience, and it's often in a children's program, where kids will say it for the first time. And boy, you talk about vulnerable. Because if I tell you this, what are you going to think about my parent? What are you going to think about my family? What are you going to think about me? And so, and Carly, in 93 seconds, so we talked about the brilliance of the puppeteer. This puppeteer who does Carly, her name is Haley Jenkins. And, and I'm in awe of her. And in 92 seconds, she goes from vulnerable and tentative and nervous. And when Elmo and Chris accept it, like it's no big deal and it's okay, you see relief and excitement. But the thing about that particular video, very deliberately, never does she mention alcohol or drugs. And for some kids, they're just not ready for that yet. And so what Carly says is, my mom, she just hasn't been taking good care of herself. And so she's learning how to do that. And she's going to meetings to learn more how to do that. Now I go to my kids group. You have to know about each kid because the answer is different. But that going to school, because kids go to school. And there were many times, especially during the pandemic, where I get on a Zoom with a mom in treatment, and we're Zooming with the kids. And so mom introduces me as one of her teachers. And I say, let me tell you what mom does every day. Well, we make her get up really early, and she's got to make her bed. And then she goes and eats in the cafeteria. And then she's in classes all day long where she's got homework and she has to read and do assignments. Then she goes to PE. There's recess. And then a 10-year-old girl looks at me and says, is my mom behaving? And I said, well, most of the time. And she goes, Mom. And so giving them that sense of relief. So I'm in the family program yesterday. And I'm with a dad here who's in family. And think about this. First of all, mom comes to treatment here. And mom's been gone now for a few weeks. And all of a sudden, dad's going away. You got to explain something and make it age appropriate. And I always believe, be conservative. I can always tell you more. But if I squeeze the toothpaste too hard, I can't put that toothpaste back in. So you just need to make it age appropriate and to help them to see that they didn't do anything to make this happen, that this was going on well before you were even born.
And that seems to be the key. It's about knowing the kid and where they're at. So kids know when something's wrong. And if there's not some answer, my experience is they blame themselves. They create an answer and it's themselves. So it sounds like you're saying it's going to be different for each kid developmentally where they are, but don't just ignore it. They need to understand that it's not about them and not their fault.
John, you're spot on in that. I believe that when kids experience trauma and no one explains it to them, they make up a story.
Absolutely.
But because of where they are developmentally, they see themselves as being the hub of the universe.
That's right.
And here's my older brother messing with drugs. It's my fault. And so it's changing that narrative, because I'll tell you, the number of people through all the years in treatment, the 3 different treatment centers I worked at, who would come to me and no one had ever intervened. And I think that story that people tell themselves when they're little kids almost becomes a life script that really thwarts human growth and development. So What are the words that I hear? I'm broken.
Yes.
I'm damaged goods. I'm worthless.
Yes.
I don't deserve good things in my life. I screw everything up. And they look at me and say, what's wrong with me? And then I'll sit with them and say, I hear you, but that's not the question to ask right now. What happened to you? And then you change that narrative.
Right.
And so you see the progression. And, I've always believed that the adults, yesterday's children, that no one helped. How many more generations?
I can't encourage anybody listening enough to, I haven't told you this, but I saw the clip of Carly in that conversation. And I had to close my door and was a little bit of a basket case for a little while. It's so incredibly powerful, and especially anyone who understands this as a kid or anyone who, anybody who's worked with family, it's an incredibly powerful thing. I'd encourage anyone you can Google it and pull up that conversation. There's a power to it. And I just so appreciate the honoring of what's happened to you. It's and making that space where kids can talk about, and adult kids.
Of course.
What happened.
Yes.
That's right.
Well, and truth be told, that was the second take. And that's, God, it's on set.
Incredible.
It's one of those few times in my life where I'm standing there and just internally saying, oh my God, how in the world did you ever end up here? How did this happen? And they filmed it, and it was really good. But, good is the enemy of great.
Yes.
And so let's think about how to do it. And then, they just nailed it. I mean, they just nailed it. And that whole studio erupted. All the people there, camera people and direct, everybody just loves kids. Just, electric.
Tell us a little bit about Carly for those people who don't know. She's lime green, pigtails?
She's just adorable, lime green with blonde pigtails. And so the backstory is Carly is 6.5 years old. And it's interesting, she was part of 2 initiatives. So before you see her in the parental addiction initiative, she's in the foster care initiative. So she's in foster care, which brings up a whole other issue in that in all of my years of doing this, I have heard many mothers in treatment called unfit mothers. I've never heard one dad be called an unfit dad. So there's a double standard here that prevents so many women from going to treatment. And when you're a mom and you have to decide, treatment my kids. So in the storyline, and this is well before me, I had nothing to do with this, but they're brilliance. And so here's mom putting her little girl in foster care to get help, and why there aren't more programs for women and their children. I just read a research study last week, and what it looked at is the experience of moms in treatment with their kids. They stay longer, and they have more positive outcomes for recovery because their kids are with them. And the number of times through my career, I have a mom that was 2/3 of the way out the door. Let me give you a brief example. So I'm at the Betty Ford Center, and there is a mom 4.5 days into treatment going through a detox from opiates. And the almost 6-year-old daughter's at home, and she's already packed. She's leaving. And so they get her to see me. It's interesting when we created a system whereby if someone is going to leave treatment, they always call, and they have kids, they always call one of us in the children's program for being a part of the last meeting. And so I met with her, and she says, look, my daughter doesn't know where I am, and she's having night terrors, and nobody's explained anything to her. And I said, well, I want to show you something. And I show her that Carly lending a hand.
Wow.
Because her big thing is, don't tell my daughter I'm using drugs. Don't tell any of this. For moms or for dads, but we're talking about a mom, they don't want their kids to know, because what are they going to think of me? Are they still going to love me? When you can teach kids in a kind of way where they're proud, gosh, it takes courage and strength to hang out with TNR and to ask for help. What wouldn't you want your kids to learn setting in an example like that? So I showed her Carly, and she loved it because lending a hand, because there's nothing about alcohol or drugs. So I make a deal with her. I said, so you're going to stay in treatment. You're not going on. I'm so worried about you. You stay. I'm going to get a hold of your husband. We'll walk through it. I'll talk to your daughter after she sees it. I'll call your counselor and let her know every time I do something. So you're not going to be in the dark. And that mom stayed in treatment, and that little girl was okay. That mom is still in recovery.
Wow.
And if she went out the door, chances of her using, and that kind of pain,
for sure,
and that kind of guilt.
Yeah.
So,
Jerry, we are developing a program for women, pregnant women, but also women and their children. Even if they have a second or third child,
love it.
They are welcome here.
Yes.
Our pilot program will be open
chills.
this fall. just 5 patients, but we are going to expand as quickly as we can.
And I will say that you will be a model for the rest of the world to look at and want to replicate, because it is such a missing piece. And yeah, it's hard for kids when dad goes to treatment. No doubt about it. There's something about it when it's your mom.
The stigma, anybody in you don't even have to be a public health expert. I mean, where the research is so clear that stigma helps to keep people sick.
Yeah.
In this conversation, I'm thinking about the power of healing isn't just about that person, right? It's not just about that mom.
Right.
That moment where it would changed her life, that she stayed and she got well, but it also changed her child's legacy.
Yes.
It changed her child's life and that kid's life. I keep thinking about the beauty of, like, your kids only knew the best parts of their grandparents, right? So it doesn't, so stigma doesn't just then affect the person who has the illness, it also affects the generation and the next generation and the next generation. I remember there was a time where, in Florida, we have this thing called drug court. And I wasn't very familiar with it, but I went to, and this time when my own judgment and stigma kind of knocked me in the head. I was pretty young, it's pretty early on, I hadn't been knocked around enough to learn, and so I went to the drug court, and I noticed that there were people there, and I noticed that there was somebody there, it was clearly a mom and had a couple of kids. And I sat there, a therapist, a pastor, all of these credentials, and internally, I want to tell you that I was like, what a terrible thing. This mom is bringing her kids to court, and I was full of just judgment. And as the court went on, eventually she was called up, and she's at the bench, and the state attorney stands up and says, "Your Honor, this is so-and-so, and she has spent the past year in this program. She has changed her life, and because of the work that she's done in this program, I'm going to get emotional with you. The words were, the state of Florida announces a null pros against it, and her charges for whatever it was, are dropped. The judge, I can see the judge with his big beard gives her a hug. Yep. The whole room is. But what this was a brave mom who's worked for a year to get better and be well, and these kids. I thought from the outside, these kids are getting, my judgment would have kept me from that. So I think recognizing that stigma and judgment first of all, it's not just bad people who have stigma and judgment. Yeah. And so all of us need to look at ourselves and really investigate and let ourselves be challenged. And I think the other thing was just remembering, for me, letting go of stigma, letting go of judgment, and saying that every person is deserving of recovery. It isn't just about that mom. Right. Those kids have a different life. This was probably 20 years ago. Yep. Those kids have a different life today because of that recovery. So I love those stories. I appreciate that.
Well, I think the only way we beat stigma is by continuing to put a face and voice to recovery.
Sure. Or we could send TNR after it.
I love it. Yeah, TNR. But the deal with TNR, and I'm glad we went back there, is that, what happens if I come to Hanley and come to treatment, I get introduced to TNR, right? And I'm hanging with TNR. And after about 6 months, you know what? I got this, man. I don't need, I got it. And then I leave TNR. I don't do that anymore. Guess who's waiting for me?
Every breath you take.
That dreaded disease.
Guys, this has been an enlightening conversation. I have to tell you, Dr. Jerry Moe, you were incredibly authentic, and I am excited about the programming you're creating here because I can see it's going to be filled with hope, promise, and if you bring that childhood innocence that you exhibited here, I think you're going to make a tremendous difference.
Generational change.
Generational change. So thank you so much for your authenticity.
We are in awe of you.
Oh. And let me say, too, that And what Mrs. Ford, I had the blessing for a number of years, 8 or 9 years, to actually work with her. And just a woman of such beauty and grace, and yet down to earth like you wouldn't believe. And so she'd always would say to me, pick your partners wisely. And so let me say something about Hanley, which is truly a pioneer in the treatment field and innovation. My goodness, to work with older adults, individualized assessment and care, gender-specific treatment, 5-day family program. And so I'm blessed and honored to be here. And I know that Mary Jane Hanley and Mrs. Ford were friends. So I can't help but think that right now they're looking down from heaven and having this huge smile on their face, maybe giving each other a high five, arms around each other, hanging out. So what
not yet.
What a
Mary
blessing.
Jane's still with us.
Yeah. She's still with us.
It was Jack that we were telling you had passed.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, Mary Jane, my gosh.
She actually came down here for a few months ago for the first board meeting of the reunification of the foundation with the center. But still that connection. Betty Ford actually, the two of them came down here with shovels and broke ground in the 1980s. And literally, I tell people all the time, the two of them literally planted some of the plants and bushes that still exist to this day on this campus. It's an incredible legacy.
Yeah, and that's it. You talk about a legacy that we just try to hop on that train and ride it and deepen it and grow it.
Well, we're excited about everything you'll be doing here at Hanley to elevate us even further. So until next time, keep embracing your recovery and thriving in your story.
Thank you for joining us for the Hanley Effect. To learn more about our programs, visit hanleyfoundation.org or call 844-502-4673.